Oh.
Hello, my name is Avia, she, her, and if you want my life story, hit me up once I'm off this stage.
Hi, I'm Jasper. I am a senior in high school attending my first Creating Change with an educational organization. Our demands for creating change in the task force are too numerous to list in full. Go to bit.ly/flat braille to read them all, but they all really come back to the same issue. Nothing about us without us.
Disabled presenters and attendees have been consistently marginalized and sidelined by the task force over a period of years. Our demands consistently ignored, our accommodations refused because someone on the planning committee prioritized their ideas of our needs over our own direct statements, or perhaps less charitably, deigned our presence, our engagement in our own communities, unimportant. For just a taste of what we're talking about here, I personally have been requesting Braille programs and signage for 5 years and began the CC20 request in January of 2019. Not only was this accommodation denied, but the conference has also neglected to provide large print in accordance with NAVH standards, except of course in the 2 paragraphs at the front of the programming booklet under the heading Creating Accessibility. Not only was this reasonable accommodation denied, but the conference staff also denied us knowledge of its denial. Imagine traveling over 1,000 miles to a conference you're supposed to be facilitating more than 12 hours of programming at, for free, mind you, and still paying your own travel, room, and board, only to be told upon your arrival that someone decided you, and only you, would be denied the ability to independently access your own schedule, never mind information about anyone else's work. Starting to get why I'm a little miffed? This is just a single problem, and we have 20 pages worth of problems.
In only the first day of creating change, I rammed into glass doors at the end of a ramp with a grade violating ADA guidelines in the host venue 4 times. I dislocated 2 joints in 1 finger, received 6 different abrasions, 7 visible shin splints, and began organizing a protest to try and make this conference a safer and more accessible place. After contacting the accessibility hotline and complaining face-to-face to task force volunteers, I and many others received no clear instructions on how to move forward. Things only got worse from there. On Friday, venue inaccessibility caused me to dislocate my left shoulder so badly that I could not participate fully in the conference for several hours until finally receiving medical attention. This does not make me feel radically welcomed, and I cannot guarantee I will return next year unless there is a major shift in accountability and a sworn dedication to accessibility.
As a longtime presenter and organizer, my own experience with the conference has been radically different, and I want to acknowledge that up front. I've been in and out of private meetings with members of the task force all conference, and they've been remarkably receptive to working alongside us. My belief is not that there is any malice on the part of the task force, only inadequacy stemming from lack of knowledge. But what is flat braille but well-meaning incompetence? A performative nod, something any abled person would look at and go, oh, it's accessible, while useless to anyone who might actually need it. So too is the state of CC20's quote-unquote accessibility. This protest is taking place to ensure that there is accountability outside of those private meetings regarding the following demands. We ask that even if you are not disabled yourself, you stand in solidarity with your disabled queer brothers and sisters and siblings, and demand that creating change in the task force create just a little bit more change. These are just a few of our demands. All essential conference information provided in Braille and in high contrast, dyslexia and colorblindness-friendly large print adhering to NAVH standards. CART, real-time captioning, already provided at plenaries, offered as a guaranteed accommodation to attendees, as well as to individual workshops which have requested it.
Transparency regarding accessibility at the conference, including the provision of reasonable accommodations, the cutoff date for procuring those accommodations, the accessibility of the host venue, and the accessibility of the immediate surroundings and local transportation options, the provision of latex-free condoms and other barrier methods, as well as allergen-free, water-based single-use lube packets.
The provision of funding and hiring of staff who self-identify as disabled to the Disability Justice Project at the task force. An accessibility expert who identifies as disabled to be given a salaried, full-time position separate from the Disability Justice Project to organize accessibility at future conferences. a dedicated conference accessibility budget given to the aforementioned in order to secure accommodations and any necessary staff trainings.
Nothing about us without us.
Again, the full list of demands. Again, the full list of demands, as well as this speech, if you want to ensure you've quoted us accurately, is available online at bit.ly/freebraille and in the CC20 hashtag on Twitter.
There are pads and pens for collecting signatures at the end of many of the rows. Please pass them around and take just 10-15 seconds out of your day to stand in solidarity with your queer disabled siblings and give your name in support of these demands.
Thank you.
Thank you, Avia, and thank you, Jasper. You're right. The Creating Change Conference and the National LGBTQ Task Force are committed to accessibility, to radical accessibility, and we can do better, and I'm confident we will do better. I really appreciate the meetings that we've had, the meeting that we had last night. I have the list of demands. As you can see, it's annotated because I've been reading through it. It's a little dog-eared at this point, and there is some great stuff in here. I consider this a gift to the conference. The amount of work that you put into it is impressive, and I really appreciate it. We are going to you are right. Our plan to address these includes working with a committee of folks. Again, I totally understand the nothing about us without us. We need to learn, and we need to grow, and we need to involve the folks most directly impacted. So we will be doing that. So again, thank you, and I really appreciate this. This is an opportunity for us to do better, as I said. And now we're going to move. We will do better. Thank you. Now on to our program.
Hello, Creating Change. Welcome back. It's our closing plenary. It's been actually only 3 days. It was 3 days ago that I met you all for the first time. It feels like it's been a month. I've met so many people, learned so much, and I can't believe that this is our last time together in this room. I hope you enjoyed last night's festivities. I certainly did. That ball was amazing. And that drag show. Okay, a couple announcements before we move on to the plenary. I want to give a big thanks to so many sponsors that we have had here with us for the several days. Our champion sponsor, huge thanks to Gilead and the Arcus Foundation. Let's give them a round of applause. You want to be sure and visit Gilead's amazing booth right outside the door. And also thanks to Act Blue, Coca-Cola, Comcast, the Carpenter Foundation, the Freeman Foundation, Viv, all of them for making sure that creating change can happen. Also AIDS United, the Mandel Rodas Fund, Planned Parenthood, our good friends at Unite Here, Wild Geese, and Unity. And all of our local friends that have come to visit here in Dallas. So let's hear it for our sponsors. They are part of our success. I don't know if you noticed this mural over here. It was out there in the exhibit hall. I want to bring your attention to it. There's an organization called Artitude, and 120 people participated in creating this. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, come up after and take a look. It's beautiful, co-created art. I want to also remind you all of the app that you have in your pocket, the Creating Change app, in particular, the opportunity to evaluate the sessions that you have been attending. It's really important for us to get that feedback and for the presenters to get feedback on their content. So if you could take time to rate the sessions that you have been to, that would be excellent. And I want to say also thank you for staying kind. It has been a marathon. One day is like 1 month, and you have all maintained some incredible open-hearted kindness while you've been here, and let's keep that going through into the evening. More than a decade ago, the task force created the Leather Leadership Award to acknowledge the enormous contribution of the leather community and its leaders to our movement. Contributions which have been unknown or simply ignored by the larger LGBT community. The task force is the only national LGBTQ organization to honor the leather community in this way, or frankly, in any way. So I'm going to invite you to help me welcome these title holders to our stage. Sin Evans of the International Ms. Leather 2012. We have Jim Richards, the first co-chair of the National Leather Association International. Linda Blakesley, longtime Texas leather woman and activist. And welcome Hardy Haberman, 2010 Leather Leadership Award winner, to present the 2020 Leather Leadership Award.
So, an invisible minority leaves itself open as easy prey for those who would deny its freedom, its very existence. Judy Mccarthy first spoke these words in her 1987 IMSL contestant speech. She has lived her life standing up against systems of racism, sexism, and injustice. Early on, her activism focused on the Native American movement and empowering women. Then, when the AIDS crisis decimated the leather community, she fought for research money and ferried early AIDS drugs across the country, delivering life-saving medications to the dying when federal regulations were holding them up. Then, as if she didn't have enough to do, she became the executive director of a domestic violence victims program in Washington, and then opened a no-kill animal shelter. She is also an artist who regularly exhibits her art at American Visionary Arts Museum in Baltimore, and some of her earlier works are owned by the Heard Museum in Phoenix and the Smithsonian. Throughout, she has remained active in the leather community, mentoring those less experienced and raising numerous leather kids. Judy's strong belief in the great creator and the spirit of Mother Earth, learned from her grandmother, guide her activism and her actions every day. She is an Apache Tiwa, an African American, an activist, a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, a leather dyke, a prankster, and the first international Ms. Leather. And she is my friend. It is my honor to present her with the Task Force Leather Leadership Award for 2020. Judy Mccarthy.
Thank you, Hardy. I don't know who he was talking about. I stood back there and I did that? I have a little disclaimer to give you first. I have to say I was, and I love this word, gobsmacked when I heard about this, because you don't think about that when you're living your life every day. It's like, oh, this got to be done, that's got to be done, I got to do this. That's all you think about. So I've been trying to think what I wanted to do or say. And I think what I want to do is, because I've gotten so many blessings in my life, that I would like to give a blessing both to all of you and to all of our people. Now my disclaimer. I'm Apache and Tewa. I spoke Apache fluently when I was little. My grandfather did not speak English. My grandmother spoke some English. My mother was really good at English. She was a Rosie the Riveter. But I have not spoken my language well, or more than a few words, in 65 years. So, if you will excuse some of my poor enunciation, and I have to use a cheat sheet and glasses because I'm relearning my language. And I'm 75 this year, so we can still learn. So this is a blessing, and I will be also interpreting the Apache. That I can do easy. Bekego and then Nishelatse, Creator, we are glad for you. Nushugo Nahinda Adenai, please look over us and watch for us in a good way. Naishkunli, Nahityati, Ibe, Naishili, be generous with us, helpful to us, our language and our ways. Francisco Naha, Ansi, strongly, keep it strong. Ashea, thank you. Thank you very much. I will treasure this. Thank you.
Hey, I have the pleasure to introduce you to Ricardo Martinez. He's the CEO of Equality Texas, and he actually just started this job in November of last year. Ricardo is a gay, bilingual Mexican-American and the perfect person to give our next award right here in Dallas, Texas. Ricardo.
Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me in the back? All right. My name is Ricardo Martinez, and I am the Chief Executive Officer for Equality Texas. Welcome to Tejas. I hope that over the last few days, you've been able to connect with so many of our wonderful local advocates who make Texas so special. If you go by what you see on the news, you may have been a little bit apprehensive in making your way to Texas, and I wouldn't blame you. Our state has a lot of work to do, but there is a tremendous amount of talent in this state doing the critical work necessary to flip the House in 2020. Your presence this weekend in this building, in Dallas, in Texas, contributes to helping advocates create communities across Texas where differences are celebrated. You are challenging conformity and homogeny and shining your light, your gorgeousness, your power, your most authentic selves, and your truth all over this city, leaving behind a rainbow trail. And let me tell you, I'm here for all of it. I've seen how some of you use the walkways as a runway, and I appreciate it a lot as a spectator, let me tell you. I aged out of that type of behavior, but I live for it. Thank you for not compromising who you are for the comfort of others. I love creating change because it fills my cup. Our work is hard, and we are all gifted a unique lens in which we view the world and this work. We may not always agree on tactics, strategy, but let's remember that we're in this fight together. I've met some of my greatest and best friends here in this conference. Those are the folks who will uplift you someday. Part of uplifting each other is celebrating each other, and today I'm here to celebrate Stephanie Cho, the Executive Director for Asian Americans Advancing Justice, who is this year's recipient of the Haas Junior Award for Outstanding LGBTQ Leadership for Immigrant Rights. I had a chance to speak to Stephanie last week. I didn't want today to be the first time we met and the handoff of her award to be awkward. I needed to understand her drive, what keeps her going, and you know what she said to me? She said that the criminalization of immigrants keeps her going. She understands that immigrants and people of color are under attack in ways that permeate our everyday lives, and she understands this pressure is compounded with queer identities and creates the oppressive systems in which we are living in today. She knows it's heavy work and struggles through it because it matters, because it's the right thing to do. Stephanie works tirelessly to create spaces where people can be their full selves without fear of retribution. She believes in people, encouraging leaders to create change in their own communities and to work collaboratively to compound their power and make lasting impact. She does this because she has clarity of purpose, to strive for the liberation of immigrants and people of color in the South. She has been a community organizer, program director for LGBTQ youth, a director of training for a national fellowship program, a labor organizer, and a consultant. And she's also pretty funny. I sent her a long list of questions to help me write this speech to truly honor her work in our movement. One of the questions I asked was, "Who is your hero?" And her reply was very succinct and very quick. "I don't do hero stuff," which just exemplifies how grassroots she really is. If I've learned anything from superheroes, I myself do superheroes, it's that not all heroes wear capes. Some raise industry standards and wages for LA's restaurant workers. Please help me welcome to the stage this year's recipient of the Haas Junior Award for Outstanding LGBTQ Leadership for Immigrant Rights, Stephanie Cho, and her special guest, her 5-year-old daughter, Nadi. Congratulations.
So I was just remarking that I haven't been to Creating Change in 20 years, and it's really changed. So it's 2020, and we're still fighting to exist and to live freely. And what I can say is I'm really here for liberation of immigrants and people of color in the South. And as people say, as the South goes, so does the rest of the country. I stand here filled with so much hope, seeing so many people, so many new faces, so many immigrants of color coming up and really doing some fantastic work. And it's really our duty as older people to step aside and let the brilliance shine through. Oh, I'm sorry.
She's my friend now.
I know, I was like, what happened? I stand here with my child, who's far away from me now, independent, as a survivor, as a mother, as a queer Korean warrior. Let's continue to love, fight, and struggle, and do this together. Thank you.
Let's give him another round of applause. So following this award, underwritten by the Haas Junior Foundation. We're going to have a panel discussion, so we're going to get some of this stuff moved out of the way. And I wanted to, just curious, how many of you had a chance to visit the mammogram van? How many human bodies have been mammogrammed? Yeah? It's pretty remarkable. They just drove that thing right into the building. And did anyone win a vibrator? Yeah. And how many of you won the vibrator at the truck? As opposed, some of you, I'm sure, managed to acquire that in some other way. So this panel discussion is going to be on immigration. And let me just tell you a little bit about our moderator, Sharita Gruberg. She's the policy director at the Center for American Progress. And according to the National LGBT Bar Association, she is one of the best LGBTQ lawyers under 40. Please help me welcome Sharita and our panelists to the stage.
Do we go up now? Yeah. Oh my gosh, thank you all for coming to today's plenary. This is an incredible turnout. Our immigration laws and the enforcement of these laws have always been unjust, and they have left many people, particularly in our community, vulnerable to abuse, to exploitation, torn our families apart. And as if that wasn't bad enough, now nearly every single day, the Trump administration introduces a new policy to attack immigrants, from the Muslim ban to trying to end DACA, to essentially ending asylum and our refugee program, and to record numbers of people dying in immigration detention. Each new policy and every single day they enact a new policy makes abundantly clear the cruelty is the point for this administration. However, despite these attacks, the Democratic debate last week didn't include a single question about immigration. So boo indeed. I am so grateful to the National LGBTQ Task Force, not just for holding space to have these important discussions, but for centering this issue during today's plenary. Not just to the task force, but also to the incredible advocates on stage with me today. They aren't just fighting back. They are working every single day in their communities to put forward a vision for what a just immigration system could look like. So with that, I wanted to introduce the really incredible folks we have here today. Starting to my left, Montserrat Padilla is the coordinator for the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network and has spent the...
Arriba!
And has spent the last decade organizing and building collective movement power, as we can hear in this room already. Nancy Hawk is the executive director of Basic Rights Oregon. They are an LGBTQ political advocacy organization with a focus on transgender justice and racial justice. Not only that, she's a founding member of One Oregon, a coalition of over 100 organizations dedicated to immigrant rights. Donnie Marrero, he works at the Texas... Donnie works at the Texas Civil Rights Project right here in Texas. Do you all remember when Julian Castro tried to escort some LGBTQ asylum seekers in Matamoros across the international bridge? She's basically responsible for that, which is amazing. And last but certainly not least, to everyone in this room who knows them, Oluchi Omeoga is the national organizer of the Black LGBTQ+ Migrant Project. which envisions a world without forced migration where all Black LGBTQ plus people are free and liberated. And so with that, I'm really excited to just jump into this discussion. First off, the situation we're in today did not happen overnight. You all have been on the front lines of these issues for years. What factors do you see as contributing to the current environment?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start. When we were asked to come to this panel, folks informed us that our job was to give you a rundown of what was happening in the immigration system while still giving you hope. That's a tough task in this current environment, but we're going to do our best that we can today. So I just want to start off by acknowledging and recognizing the space that we're all in today, because this is the spaces that are going to help us move forward to fight this administration and stop every single deportation that comes our way. I first want to thank the moderator, Sharita Gruberg, for your mentorship over the years, Solidarity, and work in action during my time at the National Queer and Undocumented Immigrant Project. In 2014, LGBTQ immigrants and our allies launched campaigns like the End to LGBTQ Detention and Break the Cage, which demanded an immediate end to all detention and deportation. Sorry, I usually am in rallies, and so this is a little different. But it's to give someone a stage today. Especially for those most vulnerable to the system that places us all at risk to sexual assault, violence, and death. Powerful and fierce organizations like the Queer and Undocumented Immigrant Project, Familia Trans Queer Liberation Movement, and many others held numerous actions, including congressional briefings, shut down ICE detention centers, as well as our very own courageous Jenicet Gutierrez held a moment of power, holding the most powerful person in this country accountable to the deportation machine. President Barack Obama, who went down in our communities as a deporter-in-chief. Because of this work, in 2015, while it was nowhere near enough, our communities won the first ever transgender care guidance memo released by ICE, which helped streamline the release of LGBTQ detainees. But of course, in 2016, everything took a turn. What I want to acknowledge is that this deportation machine is not new, and that it didn't start with Trump. And the other thing I want to acknowledge is that our movement power did not start under the Obama era. The newest iteration of the immigrant youth movement is coined to have started in 2001 on the introduction of the DREAM Act, founded by queer and woman-identified individuals. The LGBTQ movement is coined to have started during the Stonewall riots, started by trans women of color. So we need to remember where our power comes from. It is these ancestors that because of them, I am able to coexist as an undocumented and unafraid, transgender and unashamed Latina living in this country today. And it is because of the wisdom of my sisters like Ana Andrea Molina, Bambi Saucedo, Ruby Corrado, Ariana Lint, Alexa Rodriguez, Isa Noyola, and so many, many more other women, undocu trans sisters, who have taken action in saying not one more deportation. We have been working to dismantling decade-long policies that criminalize our communities, like the anti-immigrant laws passed in 1996 under Bill Clinton, which are driving mass deportation and mass incarceration today. These laws are directly responsible today for expanding the incarceration of immigrants, creating a fast track to deportations without due process, setting the foundation for local police and ICE entanglements, and cementing the pipeline of arrest to deportation. But these policies are not new. They're rooted in systems of oppression that we all know are rooted in racism, xenophobia, transphobia, homophobia, and by nature entangled in our immigration system that was always meant to be broken. Today, the deportation machine, at any given day, arrests over 55,000 folks at those for-profit prisons. And in last year alone, over 72,000 migrant children were detained in those detention prisons as well. This administration's heightened attacks are led by ICE, Immigration Custom Enforcement, and CBP, Custom Border Patrol, are persecuting our communities today, making it our livelihoods almost impossible, challenging us and targeting us at our workplaces, in the halls of justice in our county courts, and persecuting us at our very own homes. Our community is under pressure today and every single day. And the reality is that there is not the infrastructure in place to address the trauma, stress, and needed infrastructure to fight back as a collective around the entire nation. And the administration did that very strategically. He placed urgent fires before us so that it would keep us busy and not talking to each other. And we must change that today. Before I go on to the next question, I just want to bring someone very special to Texas, to my heart, and here into this space today. In 2011, Joaquin Luna, an undocumented 18-year-old from Mission, Texas, on his last day on earth, wrote in his textbook, "Jesus, I've realized that I have no chance in becoming a civil engineer the way I've always dreamed of here. So I'm planning on going to you and helping you construct the new temple in heaven." The news of his suicide rippled through our immigrant youth community. His story was that each of one of us that had to feel the psychological trauma that this country placed on us by not allowing us to survive. So in this moment, what I really ask you all to do is to join each other, collectively heal, and in those moments when you're able to offer that, provide radical joy, because that's what's going to keep us moving forward. Thank you.
I'll just take a minute. I guess I get to give a little bit of the hope part and tell a little bit about our state-based story today. And so I just want to start by sharing that as an LGBTQ organization who has strong relationships with immigrant rights organizations in our state, it didn't happen overnight. It's been happening over decades. And I think those kind of partnerships actually matter to the victories I get to talk about in a few minutes. And I just want to say, too, that it's not just about LGBT folks being in solidarity with, right? We are immigrants. We are this community, and this is our fight. And also just that the immigrant community in our state has always stood up for us as LGBTQ folks, going back decades. In 2004, there was one of those terrible one-man, one-woman marriage initiatives in our state, and we had a March for Love and Justice, and we were, it was a 50-mile march. At the 25-mile march, people needed to rest, they needed food, and who opened their doors? It was a rural community. There wasn't much hope about what was going to happen, but it was the Farm Workers Union that opened their doors and said, "We support you and we love you." And that same year, the Oregon Citizens Alliance, our big enemy at the time, went to the Muslim community and said, "Will you join us in this fight against marriage equality?" And the Muslim community said, "This seems against human rights. No, we will not join you." And so I think it's just so important as we think about this moment that is so hard about all the partnerships that we can build and all the coalitions that are so necessary to win. And in a state that has had over 30 anti-LGBTQ ballot measures, we've needed all the help we can get.
Hi everyone, my name is Dani. I'm from the Rio Grande Valley, which is 9 hours south of here. Texas is huge. And I want to talk a little bit about what's happening at the border right now, which is essentially the end of asylum as we know it, or as it has been the precedent for decades in this country. 2 years ago, we saw the horrific zero tolerance policy being implemented in the border, which led to the separation of families as they were being detained by Border Patrol. Sometimes it was parents and children, sometimes it was older siblings and their younger siblings or grandmothers from their grandchildren. And that is still happening today, not at the same rate as it was happening 2 years ago, but unfortunately, the numbers haven't gone down because the policies have changed for the better. In fact, family separations have gone down because the policies have gotten worse. And that's 2 years ago, we saw the family separation crisis. And then last year, we saw those OIG reports that were showing the overcrowding of CBP detention centers, many of them being in the Rio Grande Valley or in Texas. And then then they said they fixed the overcrowding of detention centers, but the way that they fixed it is now they implemented another policy called the Migrant Protection Protocols, or the so-called Migrant Protection Protocols, also known as Remain in Mexico, which basically no longer allows asylum seekers to seek safety in safety. While they're going through their asylum proceedings, they're having to wait in Mexican border towns. And I was born in Reynosa, Tamaulipas, Mexico. And there's a reason why my family moved. Yeah, I'm a proud Reynosense, proud to be from Tamaulipas, but I'm also very happy my parents chose to move to the Rio Grande Valley. And so right now we have about 60,000 asylum seekers who are waiting in Mexican border towns from Tijuana all the way to Matamoros, who should be seeking asylum in the United States. But because of the Trump administration and the way they have changed the policies, and I know, Sharita, you said that this didn't happen overnight, and I think Montse showed that this has been happening throughout decades of the degradation of immigrant rights in this country. But sometimes it does feel, particularly with policies in the border, they change day to day. Sometimes when there's these makeshift tent courts, so asylum seekers that they're waiting in the Mexican border towns, whenever they show up to court, they're not showing up to court in a brick and mortar court, and they're not even seeing the judge face to face. They're only allowed to cross the international bridge, and then they go into these tent courts, literally tents like you see at festivals or carnivals, and then they see the judge through a webcam. If you've ever joined a video conference call, you know all the things that could go wrong. Now imagine having the most important court case of your life and having to do it in a makeshift tent court. And this is happening every single day, and it's happening in the name of securing the United States of America. And they change the policies every single day. Sometimes they say that we can go into these tent courts because they should be open to the public, as all the courts should be in immigration courts. And then the next day they say, oh no, you can't bring a pen unless you have a media credential. So essentially that means that if you're not a reporter and you want to observe these tents, you have to take a marker or a crayon to go observe. It's a degradation of asylum. And unfortunately, the Migrant Protection Protocols is not the end goal of the Trump administration. Now we have something else called the Third Country Agreements, which means that they're sending asylum seekers, let's say from like Honduras or El Salvador, they say, oh, well, why don't you apply for asylum in Guatemala first? And so there's asylum seekers who are getting to the United States right now, who have finally made it through the journey, and then they get processed, they get put in a plane, and then when they get off, they straight up ask, ¿Dónde estamos? And they're in Guatemala. We have asylum seekers from Guatemala too. And ultimately, it's very clear the vision of the Trump administration. They want a white ethno-state. And they've made that very, very clear. And so we have to keep in mind all of these policies because it has gotten that they've slashed every single immigration policy, even legal immigration, that we've gotten to the point where it's essentially right now impossible to seek asylum. And for LGBT asylum seekers, and I'll talk more about this throughout the panel, these policies, in my perspective, are some of the most violent policies in the world against LGBT asylum seekers. And they're being done right now in our name.
Yeah. Thank you. Can y'all hear me? Yeah? Yeah? Cool. Sorry. So I think when we talk about factors that add to the immigration crisis that we have today, we would be remiss without talking about the reasons why people migrate in the first place, right? Why people are forced to migrate from their home countries. So I'm talking about climate change due to capitalism, right? Imperialism, right? Mm-hmm. The reasons why people are migrating is because of imperialism and because we have this fascination with war. And we're destroying other people's home countries and forcing them to come here, right? And I know, I really appreciate, Danny, you talking about folks having to go to other countries in order to seek asylum, but think about Black immigrants who actually don't even speak the language in which they're going to, having to go through Guatemala, having to go through Honduras to come to Mexico to then be sent back to a country where they have no idea how to speak the language, right? And this has been happening not since the Trump administration. We like to talk about how the Trump administration is so bad, yet Obama deported so many of our immigrants as well, right? And The policies that have been put in place and that are put in place are things that have been happening since the inception of this country, because we have a way of criminalizing migration because it's all due to anti-black racism and white supremacy, right? And controlling black and brown bodies unless they're contributing to capitalism.
100% second everything that y'all just said. Now on to some more positive things. Nancy, Basic Rights Oregon has succeeded not just in defeating attacks, but really moving the needle and putting in place policies that advance immigrant rights and justice. Could you share some of these initiatives and any advice or things that folks could use in other states?
Sure, I'd love to, thank you. So I'm gonna start a little timeline story. Imagine May Day, 2013. It was an amazing day for me. I was, in the morning I found out I was pregnant with my son, and then I drove to Salem, and I got to stand with 5,000 immigrant folks as the governor signed a driver's card bill. It felt amazing. But the very next week, Oregonians for Immigration Reform, who are the bad guys in our state, you can boo, you can hiss, they're terrible. Yes, terrible. What they did is they filed a referendum and said, you can't enact this driver's card bill, you have to get the voters to vote on it in November of 2014. So for years we'd fought through the Senate, through the House, through the governor to get this bill signed, and then, okay, we have to convince the voters. And in the meantime, Basic Rights Oregon was doing this little ballot measure campaign for marriage equality, no big deal, right? And we were going towards November 2014, and then in May of that year, a judge said, actually, you get to have marriage without going to the ballot. And I was like, wow, okay, this is great. And then we had this whole field team of 25 people, and we said, hey, we already won marriage, let's fight for driver's cards. And so we gave our whole field team to the campaign. And which was great, except we only got 34% of the vote. We only got 34% of the vote, and we said, what happened? And so in 2015, we came together and we said, really, what happened to all these progressive voters in our state? What happened to all the people who were supposed to be with us? And we really talked about what we were able to say during the campaign. And we talked about how little voice it felt like we had. And that I call them the consultocracy, the way that they told us to talk about the campaign was call it safe roads, have white law enforcement be your spokespeople, and it sounded like we were talking about insurance, and our campaign was not inspiring, not to the voters and not to our own communities. And so we needed to do something different, and we needed to have something that centered the voices of immigrant and refugee communities. Thank you. And so we came together and we were like, okay, we need, one, our own money. We need money that's not from the usual political donors who try to control our voices. And we need, so that's what we did. We went foundation to foundation to foundation until finally we found one that said, here's $200,000, we believe in you. And so we're like, okay, I guess we're real now, let's do this thing. Because we didn't just want to center our voices, we actually wanted to do research. We wanted to find out what spoke to people, because we know that during the marriage campaign, what really shifted things in this country is when we shifted from this head message of rights and responsibilities to a heart message of love and commitment, right? And we wanted to do that, not just for immigrants in our state, but for undocumented immigrants in our state. And so we took our money and we did focus groups and focus groups and focus groups and surveys. We did all the things. And no one had ever done it before. And it felt really incredible, except guess what? Sorry to say, there's no 3 magic words. But we did find what we already knew, which is that immigrants make the best messengers telling immigrant stories. And that white non-immigrants have no idea what it takes to immigrate to this country, and when you tell them, their sympathy grows. And so we knew that in our heart, but now we had proof. And then in 2018, guess what? Another anti-immigrant ballot measure. And it was against our sanctuary state. And this time, we talked about police profiling, we talked about race, and we talked about what it meant to live in fear. And we won. Woo! And so by almost the same percentage, which we'd previously lost by now, 64% of our state was with us.
Yep.
And so that felt good, and we were like, we need to build on this momentum, because when we lost driver's cards in 2014, they said it will take 10 years to get that issue back. And we said, no thanks. And so in 2019, we said full driver's licenses for immigrants in our state, and we passed it, and we won. Woo! And so I think the lesson that I want to share is own your own story, own your own power, tell your own story, win victories for your community.
Woo. So much. So speaking of telling your own story, Oluchi, when we talk about immigration, most of the narratives completely erase Black immigrants. What have you been doing to not just center Black immigrants, but Black LGBTQ+ immigrants in your work?
Yeah, thank you. I apologize, I'm a little nervous, so just bear with me for a second. BLMP, Black LGBTQ Migrant Project, y'all can say squad. Say squad.
Squad.
Say squad. Squad. There we go. Yep. So we are a 2.5, almost 3-year-old organization, specifically working on the intersections of Blackness, migration, and queer and transness, right? And we exist to uplift the narrative of Black LGBTQ migrants, because nothing like that has existed in the United States, right? We are the only and the first organization to be at the intersection of Blackness, LGBTQ identity, and immigration. Like, let me say that again. We're the only national organization working towards the intersection of Blackness, LGBTQ identity, and immigration, yes, sorry. Y'all know more than I do. If you want to come up on stage, do it.
They're learning quickly.
Yeah, y'all learning quick. But so we have 3 pillars. We have our local and national work, which really help reduce isolation, because what we've seen is that how white supremacy works is that they isolate us and make us think that we're the only ones of our kind, right? Like, I remember it was like 20 years before I ever met another queer African person. 20 years, 22 years when I ever met a first African person that was from my tribe, right? And like the isolation that I felt is something that no one should ever feel in their entire lives. So we have our local hubs that really reduce the isolation that we feel and actually grows power in our community. And then our national work is really calling out these movements for not being intersectional, right? We know that the Latinx community and the non-Black Latinx community is the face of the immigrant rights movement. But we also know that other immigrants exist. And especially with Black immigrants, they're not just criminalized because they're migrating, but they're criminalized because of anti-Black racism, right? So they're coming to America to seek refuge, only to find out they're at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to racism, right? And then also add in another identity of being queer and trans, which because of imperialism has criminalized queer identity across the globe. We're seeing that the BLMP is needed. So we really uplift the stories of the folks that we talk to in order to break the narrative that Blackness needs to be criminalized, that queer and trans identities need to be criminalized, and that migration needs to be criminalized. We also do a lot of public education and talking, and that's specifically to change the narrative of what we see, and like just say black is beautiful as fuck, right? Black is inherently queer, right? Blackness is inherently queer, and we're here and we're not going anywhere, right?
Thank you. Continuing on the thread of narratives and how we tell our story, Danny, can you talk to us about how digital communications and storytelling have been effective in advancing immigrant rights in the Rio Grande Valley?
Yeah, I could share most recently. So one, echoing what Nancy said, the best way to tell an immigrant story is to let immigrants tell the story, right? To tell the people who are most affected or who are being impacted to tell that story. I know I was introduced as being responsible for the Julian Castro visit, and I helped a lot. But really, the whole idea of bringing down a presidential candidate, or a former presidential candidate at this point, what came from the asylum seekers themselves. I remember one of the first times I went to Matamoros and I met Mariali, who is a Cuban asylum seeker, and she's a lesbian. And she was like, hey, I saw that in El Paso, Cory Booker went, and he escorted some people across the international bridge. Who else can we get to come down here? And I said, I don't know, but I'm like, Julian Castro seems pretty accessible. And then, so she was like, I see that you all are on Twitter. So she got a Twitter, and then a few of them got a Twitter, and it started with just tweeting at him, you know, being like, hey, estamos en Matamoros, we're here in Matamoros, we're in the MPP program. And then it's so like, I look back in how, from that moment that Mariali told me, who can we bring down, to the moment Secretary Castro was in Matamoros. And man, there was some queer magic happening there, because we manifested that magically. We said, okay, we're gonna bring down Julian Castro, and we were tweeting at him, you know, and I was like, yeah, this is cool. And we're like, knowing also organizing in the United States, I was like, well, I don't know if this, you know, like, this is gonna how effective this is, but, and then we put out a petition, and we were telling their stories, and they were writing it. They were sharing their stories on Twitter. They were writing letters. And then thanks to a queer reporter who's based there in the Rio Grande Valley, he works for Texas Public Radio. He was like, this is important. I'm going to write a story about this. And then from that story, later on, NPR was doing the series where candidates were talking to voters, which is how, thanks to that story that Ray did, I was invited to talk to Julian Castro. And I remember when that happened, I was like, this is queer magic here. We just manifested this, like, straight up. And then we did the interview, right? And even at that point, when I was doing the interview, I remember sitting down talking to Mariali and the other folks, and of course, people at the comms team at TCRP. And I said, okay, I'm gonna ask him, hey, Cory Booker went to El Paso, can you come to Matamoros? And then of course, Castro was like, yes, we're gonna do whatever we can, right? And then I remember a week later, his campaign called, and we were like, oh shit, it's gonna happen. And you know, unfortunately, the action of when Secretary Castro escorted the asylum seekers, which was about a dozen of them, all of them were returned. And that was clearly an ego trip by Customs and Border Protection, because they wanted to send a message. They weren't returned because they don't have valid asylum cases. They were returned to say, no, we're in charge here. The little tiny power that CBP agents have, se creen Dios. They think they're God. And I know whoever's interacted with CBP agents, you all know how they act. And unfortunately, they were returned, but it's thanks to them, really, that through that queer magic manifestation and just thinking about it every single day, and then also organizing, putting out that petition, and them telling their own stories and uplifting them. You know, they would tweet, Texas Civil Rights Project would retweet, I know folks on this panel would retweet, and then we got reporters following them. You know, we got reporters from all over the nation contacting them directly. And so it could start with something small. If you would have told me, right, that by tweeting and making the petition, it would have spiraled into actually like getting Secretary Castro down there and getting people to talk about this policy, I would have been super skeptical. But I think that taught me that. They've taught me so much in the kind of vision and courage we need to be leading this work with, in that if it feels like maybe we can't win or it feels a little bit scary, then that's exactly the kind of work that we need to do, and we need to be leaning into it. So put the microphones in their hands, and us that were blessed enough to be backed by institutions like myself with the Texas Civil Rights Project, and I know so many people in the room that work with organizations. We need to be helping folks right now that are at the border.
Thank you. So, Montserrat, you have been doing this work for years, starting with advocating for the DREAM Act. What are some of the efforts that you've worked on in recent years to build power? And are there any models that you're working on that you want to see folks adopting and taking home?
Yeah, so to start off, what we know this year to be true, especially during presidential election season, is that immigration detention and deportation increments at an all-time high, regardless of who's running for office. In July of 2019, President Trump tweeted that he was going to deport 2 million of our community members, and shortly after he announced his re-election campaign. And so we knew that this was going to happen, and we knew that, and as Washington State, we became prepared to rapidly respond to the urgent need when our communities called us. And so with that, shortly after the election results in 2016 in Washington State, over around 15 organizations came together, immigrant rights organizations, all through different sectors of communities, services, grassroots, people who were directly impacted. We all came together, and the founding of the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network came together. What this network really does is that it, at its core, understands that not one single organization could really protect and defend our immigrant and refugee communities, and that it was going to take all of us working with each other, moving resources left to right across the state in geographic areas to fight back, as well as advance policies. So in Washington State, because of this massive organizing, we have been able to develop a cohesive program or a cohesive effort that is based on organizing programs, new initiatives that result out of the direct need that people on the ground are telling us in rapid form, because as Danny mentioned, policies are changing so drastically that I literally forget what happened yesterday because I'm trying to catch up to what happened today. And so that's something that we need to be aware of, that you're creating systems that are able to adapt rapidly by the day and get that information out. And finally, a campaign, right, where we're building all that power on the base, getting more information on the ground so that people's needs are met, and then flexing our political power together. Some of those programs that I want to mention that I think will be critical for folks who know and take back, and that we need honestly more, is community hotlines, where community can call you when ICE is outside of their door, and so that you can deploy what we call rapid response teams. These are allied community groups in all across your states that are able to go and document whenever immigration is outside the door, at least to ensure that people's rights, their constitutional rights, are protected. Because what we know to be true as people who are marginalized and people who continue to be left out by the system is that when we exercise our rights, there often is always retaliation that puts our physical being at risk. And so this model has allowed us to actually pick up on how ICE activity has been happening across the state, figuring out how immigration is arresting our communities, what violations are taking place. Again, going back into July, this is when we started hearing more. Aggression from ICE and CBP officers is not new. But what we started to see in July was that broken windows started to happen in Minneapolis, in Kansas City, and in Tacoma, Washington as of in July. And that was only because our communities knew our rights, and ICE was trying to make an example out of us, but our people did not back down. And so those are some of the immediate models that I would recommend all of you, regardless if you're an immigrant, regardless of where you're at in the spectrum of being able to support as an ally. We need everybody to know how to identify ICE activity and know how to immediately respond if you hear that ICE is in your neighborhood. The second two models that I wanted to present is the accompaniment program. In this moment, like I mentioned, courthouses are inaccessible for our communities. The halls of justice, the halls where we can seek protection when our abuser is abusing us, when we need to go get our driver's license or get the passport for our children, or to just make regular errands that our families often have to do in courthouses. Those simple tasks are no longer available for our community because ICE is arresting our communities at courthouses. And so being able to accompany people to courthouses, to their USCIS check-ins, to their ICE often check-ins, to the detention to go get their bond hearings, especially when immigration sees that there's multiple lies on cases, they tend to be a little bit nicer to people. Not always, so I don't guarantee that, but at least we have seen that when allied folks are in those spaces, ICE is a little bit more sensitive, at least, and ensures that people are not being taken left and right without their acknowledgement. And the final one is a bond fund program. If your state does not have a bond fund program, you need to start working on it. I really recommend folks to work with the National Bail Community Fund, which is helping create bond funds across the state. Right now, if you all have $1, $2, these bond funds, community bond funds, actually allow for your dollar to not only be used one time, but multiple times, because these bond funds are self-sustainable. How that works is that if you donate $1 into this community fund, that dollar is then used to bond someone out. When that case is closed, that money comes back to this bond fund, and that money is able then to be used to someone else. Because of how our tax system works, those dollars actually come with interest rates. And so this is the way that we're going to, while it's not the solution, we want to close all detention centers. Needs need to be met to get people out so that poverty is not what's keeping them in those prisons. And while we continue to work to abolish ICE, those are some of the suggestions that I recommend. One of the other things that I want to recommend is that as of last week, I actually became the director of this organization. Woo! And so what I recommend is that folks continue to hire trans brilliant people, because trans divinity is real. So hire us, pay us, and trans power is real.
Yes. We're all witnessing that. All right, so we were asked to come here today to kind of give folks some ways forward and hope and build power and strength. So I wanted to kind of do a lightning round going down the row. And can you tell folks one thing that they can do when they leave to support LGBTQ immigrants? Oluchi, starting with you at the end. Oh.
We'll go with Danny.
Me? Okay.
I'll go last. Save the best for last. So I'll go last.
All right. Danny, do you want to pick it up and then
yes.
we'll go back?
Oh my God, I wrote things in a napkin, backstage. Yeah, I have two things, and I'll say them quickly. Number one is everybody here, if you're in this conference, either you are new to advocacy and you deeply care about these issues, or you've been doing this for years. There's a national conference, so not all of you are from the border. But no matter what you're working on, what part of the LGBT movement you're working in, we should all be building coalitions with groups on the border. So if you all care about the degradation of asylum, if you all want to fight against these policies, please reach out to a border group. Sometimes things as simple as committing to, hey, we'll retweet your fundraisers, to something bigger like we'll help the humanitarian aid groups, or we'll help you find pro bono attorneys for the asylum seekers. Please be reaching out to folks. And I'm especially looking at folks, if you work in Washington, D.C., please reach out to folks on the border. And the second thing is, we are in an election year, and as Sharita mentioned in the beginning, there has been 2 immigration questions in any of the debates, and they're about DACA. And we need to be having more immigration conversations throughout this presidential campaign. And we need to be talking about policy, but we also need to be having conversations about values. Yeah. We can be talking about ending 1325, about decriminalizing border crossings, but we also need to be talking about the freedom to move. We need to be talking about why people are leaving. We need to be talking about everything, anti-Black racism. We need to be talking about these things, and we are not doing enough of leading a value-based immigration conversation. So talk about policies, but let's also have value-based conversations moving forward.
I'll share a quick story. Last year, when my son was 5, and we were talking before bedtime, and he said, "What would you do? What's the first thing you would do if you were president?" And I was tired. I didn't know. I wasn't thinking. I said, "Healthcare for all." And he looked at me with such hurt and disappointment. And I said, "What would you do?" He got out of bed, stood on a box, and said, "I would free all those kids and those babies in jail." And I felt deeply ashamed that that isn't what I said, but I just feel like this isn't just another issue. This is the fight for, I feel like, the soul and conscience of our nation. And if you're an LGBTQ organization that is not already doing this work, figure it out. And, figure out what you're good at, what you have, and give that. When we had field, we gave field. When we had good communications, that's what we gave. We hosted websites. Give what you can and make it happen, and make your organization connect in real, authentic ways to immigrant rights work in your state. That's right.
Also, of course, your kid has a soapbox already. And
Great. So I also have a couple. For folks who work in LGBTQ spaces and have yet to done immigrant rights work, and folks who want to work to shut down those detention centers, I urge you and welcome you to join the Trans-Latina Coalition and Familia Trans-Queer Liberation Movement, who are leading efforts across the nation to shut down the detention centers across our country and to end LGBTQ detention. In addition, folks need to be donating and organizing locally to do immigrant rights work, because your neighbor is the one that's, unfortunately, the one that is at risk. The person who you go and have a bite at in that restaurant is the person who is at risk. So it is on you to build the support for those people in this moment where anxiety and uncertainty is at an all-time high. And for the funders, we need more spaces to build up the infrastructure that requires us to truly fight back. It is important that right now in this moment, I wish I could run to other national organizations to seek advice. If it's not tied to a specific campaign or issue, in order to do effective deportation defense, you must go local. And so we really urge all of us to be able to work with each other and do rapid response and deportation defense across the nation, because now it's needed.
Yeah. So for me, it's like, I need y'all to expand your understanding of what immigration looks like and what an immigrant looks like. Because blackness is, immigration is a black issue. Like, point blank period, immigration is a black issue. And I need y'all to also, if you have coin, throw it to immigrants, like folks doing immigration work, but throw it to folks that are doing pro-black immigration work, right? I'm talking about BLMP. I'm talking about Black Immigrant Collective. I'm talking about Familia TQLM. I'm talking about Mi Gente, folks that are explicitly pro-black doing immigration work. Also, work in your counties, right? All counties have ICE contracts, bro. What are the ICE contracts that they have, and dismantle those. Actually look and see what your counties are doing, because a lot of detention centers are county jails, right? That are not on the border. Also, uplift trans migrants whenever you can. Because they have a rough time in detention centers, they have a rough time outside of detention centers, and really uplift the narratives of queer and trans migrants.
Thank you. Can we end with a chant? Huh? Can we end with a chant?
If you want to do it, let's do it.
Let's do it together.
Do you want to do a chant? What are we chanting?
Oh, wait,
There's an organizer here, and they want to do a chant. So let's do a chant.
No, wait. I have a BLMP chant. Do y'all want to know the BLMP chant? Yeah. All right. I'm gonna give my comms person some time to record this, so we can put it on all of our social media. So Marone, where you at? All right, there we go. Give it up for Marone, please, real quick. All right. So this chant goes: BLMP, BLMP, across the land and across the sea. Ain't no borders got shit on me. BLMP, BLMP. Y'all got it? All right. Ready? BLMP, BLMP, across the land and across the sea. Ain't no borders got shit on me. BLMP, 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 across the land and across the sea. Ain't no borders got shit on me. BLMP, 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 across the land and across the sea. Ain't no borders got shit on me. BLMP. BLMP, 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 across the land and across the sea. Ain't no borders got shit on me. BLMP, BLMP.
Abolish ICE! Abolish ICE!
Abolish ICE!
Abolish ICE!
Abolish ICE!
Abolish ICE!
Abolish ICE!
Abolish ICE!
Abolish ICE!
Sin papeles!
Sin miedo!
Sin papeles!
Sin Undocumented. Unafraid.
Can I get an enormous round of applause for this amazing panel right now? And also, I know that there's so many people doing great work out there across the country. Just enormous applause for all of them. Thank you. Thank y'all for coming out. I don't know what we do now. All right.
There's a whole lot of queer magic. If you're wondering why it's so cold in here, it's because we're trying to preserve this magic that's happening right in here. Is it working? I can't believe we're at the end of our time together. I'm not good with goodbyes, so I'm just gonna stretch this out just a little bit. So, you know, this is and the last time that we're going to meet together in this room, but it is by no means the end of our experience here at Creating Change. There's still plenty to do. There's the Glitter in Gold, our night of chic, which takes place at 8:30 in Dallas B&C with DJ Michael Lee. So I want to see you there. We also have a second game night at 8:30 for a lot of non-alcoholic fun. And then there's still tomorrow morning where we will have a radical farewell with an indoor street fair. Okay, so just one floor below us, there's gonna be games, there's gonna be a mechanical bull. I wanna see some of you on that. It might not be me, but I'm gonna be watching. So it's a great way to say goodbye to Dallas and to all of your new BFFs. I mean, how many of you have new BFFs after having been here for just a few days? Yes. So much that has happened here together is going to impact everything moving forward and all the change that you're going to create. So all movements need to contain some joy, and I think we have that. We'll definitely have that Sunday morning. And I want to see you next year in Washington, D.C. That will be January 27th to the 31st of 2021. And that's the end of our plenary time here at Creating Change. Thank you. Give yourselves a hand. We'll see you next year.
Baby girl, I'm the cream of the crop. Creme de la creme, got the juice so they jive. Women in my city treat it like I'm Diddy. If me ain't a thing, I'm independent with my lane. I mean, they're very fly. I mean, they don't even try. No.